Hey there, good afternoon. Welcome to Prog Monster. My name is Murph. I am the host of this show, a show dedicated to progressive rock, hard rock, heavy metal, and other forms of rock music. So today it's our Monday night look back at a classic rock album. And I've chosen a really good one for today. This one. Yes, Going for the One. Cover aside, fantastic album. Okay, so lots to say about this album. This album actually is the first one that I've done that I've begun to really think about how I do things. Before, when I used to make master albums, my master albums started occurring probably in the 80s. I used to give, if I really liked some album and I played it a lot, it got a masterpiece stamp on it. And years later, it's not so easy to do that with me. I'm more reluctant to give out that kind of status to an album. Some of the albums on my masterpiece list, and some of you have watched the 2 episodes I've had, there's 2 or 3 on there that have faded quite a bit from their original spots and moved down a little bit. And the reason they did that was because emotions aside and nostalgia aside, there were songs on the album that weren't really that great. It's kind of like the Baseball Hall of Fame. There's guys who got in there because teammates won the World Series who were great, and they were voted into the Cooperstown, and then they had the right to bring in people they wanted. Some of those people they got in, while good and contributed largely to the World Series, really don't deserve to be in there. And maybe that might be the case with these masterpiece albums. There's 3 or 4 of them like that. And when I was putting it together, I was saying, yeah, these are masterpiece albums, and they have been for me for a long time, but there are some really weak sisters on these albums. And much more difficult to get that status now with me because, as you're going to see with this album, there is no weak sisters on this album at all. But there's reasons why it hasn't made that status yet. And I'm going to go into all them after I do the album. So starting out, I'll start out the way I normally do with these albums. This is it. This is the album. Try to get my fingers in the corner where you can see the whole album. It's an architectural album cover. I hate to say this, but when I got this album, it was probably, I'm going to say about 83, 84. Or it might have been later. I can't remember. But I've had this particular CD for over 30 years. I don't know that I had this an album or not. I may have had it in cassette. Can't really remember. It didn't have a huge impact on me when it first came. And, I think that had a lot to do with my age, first of all, because I was young and I often bought things based on the covers. So my favorite comics were always the ones with the best covers. My favorite books, I would buy books based on the covers. Sometimes I bought albums based on their covers. And this one just didn't measure up. And part of the reason it didn't measure up is because it reminds me of my architecture class in grade 11 in high school, where I didn't really do all that well and felt awkward and out of place. And this album, because I had one of the architectural assignments was to draw and to perspective a building, and the building was similar to this, and it just reminds me of that, and it loses points because of that. Unfortunately it shouldn't, but it does. So anyways, this album was released on July the 15th 1977, so for me it's right almost dead center of where my favorite albums are. So it's right in there. Mountain Studios in Montreux, Switzerland. So in a different place than a lot of their albums were recorded. 38, almost 39 minutes long, so it's a good length, solid length. On Atlantic Records, like all their predecessors, and was produced by Yes. So on the surface, really solid stuff. The instrumentalists, of course, are one of the classic bands of Yes, Anderson, Howe, Squire, Wakeman, and White. those Anderson vocals, and does some harp on this. Steve Howe, steel, acoustic, electric, pedal steel guitars and vocals, and he's masterful on this album, by the way, as he is on most of their stuff. But he just doesn't seem. He seems to have a level 9 and above on everything he does, as far as his guitar ability goes. Squire, bass, fretless, and 8-string bass and vocals as well. Squire is an underrated vocalist. A lot of Yes's backing and harmonic vocals, which are strong, I attribute to his input. And Hal wasn't too bad in the day, but he's definitely lost it now. Wakeman, piano, keyboards, church organ, polymoog, synthesizers. All of the strong stuff that he does on this album. And then, of course, Alan White on drums and percussion. So, anyways, I just moved that out of the way so I don't have to look at that anymore. So now we have basically 5 tracks on this album. The album Going for the One, title track. Before we get into it, just the whole atmosphere of this album is very, I think, I want to say the word sad, but I think that's too deep of a word. It's more of emotional. It's an emotional album with a lot of emotional songs. I think it's well put together, the album, but there's a couple tracks on here, Going for the One and Parallels, which I think are a little different than the other 3. So there's kind of a split here. It's not a volcano or a a Rift Valley split. It's just a minor split. A couple on this side, a couple on that side. So that actually gives the album a little bit of, I would say, a little bit of flavor or variety. Not a lot, though. The album is not a huge variety album. Like, you're not going to get different stuff all over the place here. You get most of the stuff is not too far off from each other. The other thing is, I think John Anderson, of course, is at his best. He's very high on this album, more so than a lot of their other albums. And that's saying something, because he's always fairly high on most albums. But this high, when I say high, is voice, not his mind. I'm not referring to what he does or doesn't do. I'm referring to his voice. His voice is quite high on many of the tracks here. But it's perfect. And John Anderson has one of those voices that's perfect for not only Yes, but for progressive rock in general. I think he's got to be top 2, top 3 vocalist for progressive rock bands. So anyway, so you have very strong vocals here, and his performance on this album is, of course, stellar. You get Steve Howe, whose guitar on this is varied, a lot of varied guitar here, but really, really tasty solos, really, really good fills, excellent guitar playing. Like, he's just, to me, he's the best guitarist in the world, and that's just my opinion, but I think he's that for a reason, Then we have Rick Wakeman, who's a little bit more reserved on the album, but has some really strong points on this album. His synthesizers are very atmospheric and add a lot of what I call dense atmosphere to this album, like giving this album its flavor. So he's big on that. And then you have Chris Squire, of course, strong bass on some of the tracks, but really lending that kind of feed that he's good at doing as well. Alan White, of course, is, he's a solid drummer, really good, strong stuff. Doesn't get probably as much of attention as he should, but he's competing against such dominating players, so it's very tough. So anyways, that's the overall feel, and the overall feel from this album is really good production, nice, really good sound, great atmosphere, everything that you would want in a masterpiece album. It hasn't reached masterpiece status for me, but I think, like Relayer, the one I did prior to it, it's destined to get there. Now, Relayer and it flip-flop back and forth. I would probably say this is a bit better of an album. I'm probably going to take some heat for that, but these two albums are kind of a, you want to put an asterisk beside albums in the Yes catalog, these two albums would have that. They should be masterpiece albums, but they haven't reached that status yet. So anyways, we did Relayer. We're going for the one here. I think you see a little bit of that riff that's starting to develop here between, I would say, the Anderson Wakeman group and the Steve Howe, Alan White, Chris Squire group. Those three wanted to be more heavier, and the other two wanted to go more of a soft way. And you'll see that there's a kind of a mix of both of those songs on here. But there's not a huge riff yet, but you can see that it's coming, right? Anyways, start out with the first track, the self-titled track, Going for the One. John's voice is very strong on this. The guitar is a bit meandering. It means it goes around a bit. And he uses a lot of slide guitar sounds on this, which is different than a lot of the rest of the album. That's why I think this song is a little bit more to this side than it is with the mainstream of the album. It's not one of my favorite tracks on the album, and maybe for that reason. I'm not 100% sure. I just never really kind of warmed up to that. Sometimes when I'm thinking about this album, I'll say, oh yeah, okay, this song, and I can never quite remember the fourth song, and it's usually this one. And it doesn't make any sense because it's the title track of the album. So maybe I'm just getting old. I don't know. Anyway, so a good track. Certainly a passable track. Not a bad track at all. The next track is probably my second favorite track on this album. I really like this song initially quite a bit. The other song that's ahead of it took a longer time for me to absorb, but I like this song quite a bit. It was actually probably my favorite track initially on the album. John's voice is at its best on this track. I love the acoustic bits that give this song the real classical feel, and there's a lot of them. They start out with that. There's parts during the song, and then there's a part at the end as well. Like, he really adds this real classical bit to the album. He gives that song that kind of classical sound that you would get, you're thinking like from Mozart or something like that, something from the 17th century. It gives that feel to it. It isn't that, but it gives a bit of a feel to that. And the keys, of course, give a lot of atmosphere to this whole song. They back up what he's doing on guitar and make it even more of a classical sound. I really like the lyrics on this song quite a bit too. Overall, it's about 7 or 8 minutes long, and I don't feel like it's too long or too short. I think it's a perfect length. Yeah, it's always been one of my favorite off of this album, and it has remained that way. I don't feel any burnout from it. It's when I put this album on and this song comes on, then I start thinking, oh yeah, that's why I chose to listen to this album today. It was for this song. Okay, so the next track up is another track like the title track that I never really quite warmed up to. It's a bit heavier, sounds kind of commercial. Yeah, it's got a bit of a commercial sounds to it, which I think for me hurts the song. But a lot of people really like this track, and a lot of people cite this as one of their favorite tracks on the album, and I can't dispute that at all. It has a lot of really good things going for it. John's vocals again are very strong on this track. The bass is more dominant and more front and center on this track than the first two tracks, which I think is a strength for this song. It has some excellent keyboard solos by Rick Wakeman. It has a good melody and riff. And those two things, I think, contribute to its commercial aspect, which also make it more radio friendly, and really captures people right away. I think that's the reason why I think it's so popular. And it ends with this really nice, great guitar fill, which I think is the best part of the whole song. But overall, it's not a very strong track for me. It and Going for the One are both passable. By no means they're bad. They're not bad songs at all. I will listen to them. I never get really bored of them, but they're just not my favorites. That's what I'm trying to say. Is they don't get up here, but they're still pretty strong, which gives the overall album a much stronger feel. Okay, the next track, which is Wondrous Dreams, is kind of a softer song, and very vocally dominated song. It's kind of the John Anderson song of the album, if you know what I'm saying. Like, it could go on to one of his solo albums. It wouldn't be out of place there at all. But I think it has some strong stuff that make it a Yes song. You know, this song has a really showing that the group was able to do both soft and hard stuff together. Like, they are really good at that. And there's some nice keys that add a kind of a surreal kind of atmosphere to the song. I believe there's a harpsichord fill in this. It sounds like a harpsichord fill. It's just a small bit. And I like the harpsichord quite a bit. It's one of my favorite keyboard instruments. And the thing I like best about Rick Wakeman is he will use it, but he doesn't overuse it. I've heard people that overuse it because they're trying to create a certain atmosphere in an album, and it takes away after a certain amount. Like, it's a good as an instrument for particular parts that you want to create some kind of a feel for. And I think Rick Wakeman is kind of the master at knowing when these things suit the situation best. And there's a little bit in this particular song which I think really give it that atmosphere. You know, a great tune. Always been probably my third favorite on the album. I liked it initially, but I always thought it was a bit of a John Anderson tune. Kind of reminds me of the song Circus of Heaven from Tormato. They're very similar, and that and Turn of the Century drew me to this album initially, and then the harder stuff took over after a while. So now we get to the final track on the album, the massively long, well, not massively long, but fairly long, progressive monster, Awaken. This song is a master song, no doubt about it. It's got to be a top 5 Yes song of all time. Certainly a perfect song in every sense of the word. It's wonderful to listen to. It has such great atmosphere to it. It's got bits and pieces throughout the whole song that really add that atmosphere to it, and just a super great song. And there's a nice piano bit that sets the tone right at the beginning of the song that I like. I like piano used in the way that he uses it on this song, opening and sets an atmosphere for what's to come. I don't like just the constant pounding of the stuff. It just kind of takes anything that's a distraction from the guitar. I don't really like with the piano. And in this song, it's not a distraction. It's an opening part. The vocals are of the highest possible setting here. I don't know if these are the best vocals John Anderson's ever done, but off the top of my hat, or off the top of my head, which is the way the phrase usually goes, I cannot think of a song where he's better at than this one. Can't think of one. I can think of some songs he's really good at, but I don't know that they're better than this. Anyways, Steve Howe's guitar and the bass give a really strong kind of atmosphere to this entire song. Both of them like creating that real solid bass for this song. The guitar solos to me are both off of the charts here. He does a few of them. And I think they really show why Steve Howe to me is the best guitar player in the world. Maybe the best. Well, he's the best progressive rock guitar player, and I'm going to take some hits for this. We're all entitled to our own opinion. These are just how I feel about Steve Howe and his abilities. He's always top level, and he's always top of his game. Well, at least in the 70s albums for sure, and even as far as north as drama, really good. There's some really good key parts on this album too, on this particular song. Rick Wakeman showing why he is the atmosphere king, so far as I'm concerned, the guy who creates the whole mood of the song and adds his keyboard textures and stuff to it that just like blow the roof off of the song. So it's just fantastic song. It's almost angelical, however you want to say it, just almost surreal. It's so good, and really brings the level of this album up quite a bit, because if you take this particular track off the album, this is a one album and will never be more than that. But with this song on it, you got to give it great consideration for a masterpiece album. And when I usually do an annual review at some point of when it's time to add some group song albums to masterpiece or take some away. I've not taken many away. I can't really think of any albums in recent years I've taken away. I know I've done it before. I know I've said, you know what, I don't know what I was thinking. This is definitely not a master album. There's a few that I've done that with, but there's not been many. There's some that are on the cusp that could go. And the stronger I get into this, the more I do this, the more I realize that I really don't belong on that list. But it'll be hard to get them off, because I also, master albums aren't always just about how good the album is or how fantastic the music is or how well it's put together or anything. Sometimes it's also an emotional thing. How did this album hit me? How has it always hit me? How do I feel about it? That kind of thing plays large in this, and that's part of the reason why this album hasn't made a masterpiece, because the album cover and even though it's got such good production and sound to it, I still feel like it's almost, I don't know how I want to say this, it's almost too machined, or what's the word, too produced, overproduced, I guess is the word. It sounds too almost synthetic. It isn't, but it's bordering on that in some areas, and that kind of bothers. I like a little more of a raw sound, and I don't think when I think of this album, I don't think of a raw sound. I think this is very produced album, very well produced though. So anyways, there you go. Yes is going for the one. Great album, very close to the line, will probably be on my short list. Last year I had 14 albums on the short list, and 4 of them I upgraded to master albums. I felt they deserved it based on my thinking about them and how I feel about them now. This album wasn't on that short list. Relayer was on that short list. I think this album is going to be on that short list next year. I think it has to be, and it'll be fairly close to the line. But anyways, I'm digressing a bit. I hope you enjoyed this video. Monday night look back at a classic rock album. If you did, please like and subscribe. It's much appreciated. Put your comments down below. Tell me what you feel about this album, this wonderful album that Yes has put out. They have such a history of great albums in a row, and this is just another one. Anyways, I hope you have a good evening and take care of yourself. Prog Monster out.